Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. I have a returning creator who's been on the show before, and I also have a creator who's never been on the show before. So a real treat for you today. We're going to be talking about a book that's just about to drop. It's called The Manchurian. It's part of the Horizon experiment, which is something Pornsak Pichetshote is launching at Image. He's going to tell you all about it. But mostly we're going to focus on The Manchurian because we have the artist of The Manchurian, Terry Dodson, joining us. Terry, welcome to the show for the first time.
Oh, thanks, Jace. Good to be here.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting book. I got a chance to read it already, and I really enjoyed it. It's a complex book, and I want to talk about that in terms of narrative and what that might mean visually for you, Terry. So let's start off by letting everybody know what The Manchurian's about. So, Pornsak, if you want to give the elevator pitch for everyone.
Sure. The Manchurian is about a Chinese super spy, kind of in the vein of James Bond, but really, a super spy that runs covert missions here in America for China. And the way Chinese espionage works different from Western espionage. They use what's called the 1,000 grains of sands approach to espionage, where in America, if we wanted to get sand from a beach, we would have an elite frogman come out in the middle of the night, get to the beach and steal a bunch of sand. Whereas in China, what they would do is they would get 1,000 tourists to walk in the middle of the day across that beach, and then at the end they would each take off their shoes and dump what little sand that they had out together until they got more sand or as much sand as that elite frogman did. So it's kind of about a community of how just regular citizens sort of they put their knowledge together and sort of lead to sort of secretive and vital information. And the Manchurian is sort of the fixer who helps any of those citizen spies when they get into any kind of trouble.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's such a different approach. Not saying one is better than the other, because it probably in different situations one might be better suited or what have you. But again, it's just so different. I was unaware of this, so it was really interesting. So let me throw it over to you, Terry. When you got approached to be on this project, and they were kind of explaining, was it something you were familiar with? Did it kind of inform your decision to join the project? Did you find it kind of interesting?
Oh yeah, the spying approach is brand new to me. I wasn't aware of that, so I thought that was pretty cool. So since I'm able to learn something new and discover new things or whatever, that makes the project really appealing to me because someone who's drawn so many different types of comics, so many comics. Anytime that something new comes along that excites me, I always want to work on it. That's what keeps me fresh as an artist and as a creator, is those challenges of doing something different, something out of my comfort zone a little bit. And I really enjoy that aspect of doing this job is creating something new and creating something different and something that I've not seen before. So that Pornsak's story was perfect for that. Plus, I mean, I like the genre of the spy, and so it's fun to take that and kind of twist it on its head a bit, which is always a neat read.
Yeah, and certainly we've had James Bond, in popular culture for decades, but certainly in comics for a little while now. And it is drawing, kind of more real world things, and you've done, recently on your Adventure Man series, Terry, or stuff like Star Wars superhero stuff, that sort of thing. So you hear James Bond, and it engenders this certain aesthetic, but it is a little more grounded in reality. So is that a different approach for you? Do you use more reference at all, or how does that work?
Since this was real world, I mean, we're talking actual locations. I'm obviously going to make sure that stuff's accurate. I mean, I do that whatever I do, but even if it's Star Wars, I still find the right reference to make that most accurate. And then I think at some point you take it and then you run with it because it's your vision. You're the director now. You're the art director. So even the location, one specific one we used was the San Francisco Art Museum, where I found the gist of it, and then I made it look my world version of it, my Manchurian spin on it. So it's those little things that I like to do. It research the thing, figure it out, and then make it my own. And I've done that with everything I do. So it's very much normal in how I work that I always research things significantly and really figure out what I'm going to do before I draw it. I mean, my whole career, the way I've learned to to draw was by looking at the real world.
Right.
You know, even though I draw all this fantastic stuff, it was me looking at the real world and drawing the real world where I figured out how to put that stuff in my head and figure out what things look like, and then take those things and make my own version of them. So yeah, no, it's very much normal that way. And as far as like the motion stuff and tension amongst just people is stuff that I do well anyways. I do well with acting and that kind of stuff. So it was nice to take that and not just have it just be action, but how do we take these elements that are not traditionally associated with a spy film, but the human element of it, and really try to emphasize that stuff, put the danger there on a different type of the same kind of danger, but a different type of danger as well. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, right? Because it goes back to what Pornsak was kind of educating us about how different spycraft is, if it's kind of Asian or Eastern, as opposed to kind of the Western, especially James Bond. We're thinking UK or the US with the CIA and what have you. So Pornsak, I read an interview you gave about the Horizon experiment, overall in your series in particular with Variety. And you mentioned when you wanted to get an artist, you were talking to Will Dennis, who's the just a fabulous editor and is helping you edit all these books. And you were talking about, I want somebody like a Terry Dodson style artist, and Will Dennis is like, well, why don't we just get Terry Dodson? But the thing that stuck with me is, and again, Terry is legendary and so talented, especially when he works with his wife Rachel, coloring and what have you. You're like, I sort of see story in my head with Terry Dodson's style, like that's what you've become used to. And I thought that was just brilliant. So when it comes to getting him on board, and we are talking about kind of a complicated story, like Terry was just saying, in terms of the interaction and the dynamic might not be the same type of. There's tons of action, but it might not be the same type of action because, again, that difference between East and West when it comes to spycraft.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking out the story and you're visualizing it, what are you bringing to it as far as like any instruction or any prompts for Terry? Is it a full script? Talk a little bit about the actual nuts and bolts of the collaboration.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in general, I write with a full script. So that piece was kind of typical for me. I mean, the thing about Terry is that, like, when you have sort of like a spy, something in sort of like that James Bond vein, you instantly think glamorous, you think gorgeous, and and action-packed, and those are all things that Terry does so well. But like the thing that not just Terry, but like so many artists who do the kind of stuff that Terry does, they don't get enough credit for. It's just how good their acting is and how good their storytelling is and all that. And that's what makes Terry, like, he can handle the, gorgeous people doing action-packed things in gorgeous locales, but he can handle the quiet moments of like two people talking so well, and the camera move. Like, it's funny. There are talking head scenes in the comic, but they never feel like talking head scenes, and that's because Terry is so good moving the camera and keeping it dynamic just when it's two characters in a room talking. And so those are some of the things that instantly popped to mind to sort of think about Terry. And then it was just like a cool thing where, as a comic book writer, one of the things you kind of get used to is you explain what it is in your head, and you're used to the artist doing their own thing, and it comes back, and you're like, oh, I didn't expect this, or oh, I didn't expect that. I mean, the surprise in working with Terry was it was everything I kind of imagined, except it was just way more beautiful than I could have ever imagined, and that was a unique experience for me. To get everything you want, but just not, but just way better than you thought it was possible. That was kind of the magic with working with Terry for me, and I think a lot of that is I've read Terry's comics since Manta in the Ultraverse and going all the way up. So I'm sure there's a lot of bit of his storytelling that's just imprinted on his mind. But I think a lot of that too is just Terry has gotten so good in the many decades he's been doing this now that he knows how to, even something like the first page, that's a 4-panel page, but it reads like a splash in 3 panels just because Terry is so good at just sort of, composition and managing the space.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I'm glad that you put it that way. Very subtle, right? Because when it comes to these type of stories, details matter, right? And specifically, I'm thinking about the scene where the two handlers, if you will, sort of meet up, and there's a water bottle there, and I'm not going to spoil it, everybody, but it's an important part of the story because it kind of gives context. So putting details in like that, Terry, is that something that you enjoy? Is it challenging? Is it a bit of both?
No, I enjoy it. The more stuff there is to put into a story, to put into a page, to pull the reader in, to absorb them into that story, I love. I always look for things that how many things. It's almost like an in joke.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right thing, but it's something where a reader can see this thing and it sucks them into the story. Like the water bottle. I mean, that was Pornsak mentioned. Make sure we emphasize this thing. So that told me that okay, I'm going to place this thing in these certain positions that it's this reminder to the reader. And that's a blast to do. Again, it's the small things that make you as a reader pay attention, and then you're hooked. You kind of forget that you're looking at lines on paper, right? You're now in that gap between the picture, the gutter, the picture, the gutter. You're now filling those blanks in because now you're into that world. And as a comic book artist, that's like one of the I'm gonna call it a trick. I just think it's something that you need to do in order to engage the reader beyond just drawing pretty pictures. You've got to pull them in, whether it's the details on a shoe, a location, those hand gestures, the way someone might rub their face during a panel, and it's like, oh, that person's doing that because they're nervous about this thing, and so it's all those little subtleties that sucks the reader in.
Yeah, and the other thing that you get to do is you get to draw a guy in a tux. Right, that cover is so striking. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see this cover. So I'm curious about this because again, you do a lot of cover work and it's always beautiful. Do you go through a series of kind of layouts to see what's going to work? Can you take us through your process of creating a cover?
Yeah. So what I do this every time for every cover I do it. It's this exact same routine because I do so many covers. But I go to my sketchbook and draw my first idea or second idea, and then from that, just like more ideas spring. And so I just draw as fast as I can. I don't worry about clean drawings that anyone else can understand. And so at the end of that, I'll have a page full of all these cover ideas, and I'll look and scan that into my computer. And I'll pick like what I think are the 3 or 4 strongest ones, and then really emphasize those ones. And then even as I'm doing that, I'm refining. It really becomes clear what the best idea is. Sometimes I get lucky and there's actually like 2 or 3 good ideas, and it doesn't matter which one they pick. But once I know, I think with this cover, I think we got to a point where, in my mind anyways, it was pretty clear what I wanted, and that was it. I was able to throw in all these elements I thought needed to be there, but still have it be... I really wanted it to be a graphic, striking cover. I wanted it to be something like Dave Johnson would do, where he could, it's initially it's striking, but then the more you look at it, the more stories that come out of that cover, without having a lot of different people on there or a lot of different little miniature compositions. So yeah, I do that process for every cover I do. When I do covers for Marvel or DC, I send in like 3 or 4 of those little sketches, and they give me back that feedback, and I go and draw it. So. This is the only tricky part with this one is it's the first issue of a creator-owned book that I created, so there's so many possibilities, But then, thinking back to that really more graphic kind of cover, it's like go this way. This is kind of a heritage to a spy cover, and I say Dave Johnson because I think he does that kind of thing really well, where he can encapsulate so much elements in just a real simple graphic design.
Yeah, one of the other things that really works on this cover, everybody, when you look at it closely. The main character here, Calvin, he's like full color, and then the background, the colors are a little bit muted, which really kind of makes him pop. And it's so interesting because what you've been able to do in this story, Pornsak, and I make sure everybody, when you pick this up, read the little essay in the back about some of the background, and Pornsak, we'll talk a little bit about that. But the other thing that informs is the fact that this guy, Calvin Lowe, yes, this is his job, and yes, he has allegiance to China and his country and what have you, but he's still just a guy, and it's clear throughout the story, again, we won't spoil what happens, but it's clear that what he does as this spy, as this guardian angel, as this handler, is taking a toll. And that I find to be really interesting, because you can do the whole glamorous, James Bond sort of thing, and that's entertaining, but let's go deeper. Let's look at some layers beneath. So was that something right from the start with this idea, Pornsak, that you wanted to explore, kind of the real world, implications of this sort of thing?
Yeah, I think, because we started with, with facts about Eastern sort of wet Chinese sort of espionage, but wanted to build a larger than life sort of mythology around it. We also wanted to ground it in sort of the reality. And I think, when you're looking at source material, like, if you're looking at, Ian Fleming's Casino Royale, the novel, if you look at John le Carré, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, one of the fascinating things about all of these spy stories, and it's probably because they were written by former spies who are now no longer spies, you get a theme of sort of these midlife crises that sort of pop up, and like, what did I do, what did I do with the younger portion of my life, and where am I now? And, like, there's a really there's a whole chapter in Casino Royale where James Bond wonders if he's impotent after like torture and all that. So it's like just fascinating. It's just a fascinating examination of sort of a time in someone's life too. And so I wanted to bring all of those traditions to the Manchurian. And a lot of that was the push by my editor, Will Dennis, as well, to find more ways to sort of humanize the character. But I think the other reason why we wanted to keep him human and keep him grounded is because the people that he's charged with protecting are sort of normal people. So much of what the book is about at the end of the day is about the power of community. And it's a different way of looking at that, but the difference between Eastern and Western philosophy, and I'm not the first person to say this, is that Western philosophy is very individualistic and Eastern philosophy is very community-based. And so one of the things that I found interesting on the mythology the Manchurian is based on about Eastern espionage is that, it's built around the power of the community as opposed to the power of the individual. And so it was exploring things in that way that having him be sort of a larger-than-life superhero, for lack of better words, didn't feel like the right way to go. It was much more interesting to sort of have him have some of those aspects while balancing his more grounded humanity and sort of the toll the work sort of takes on him.
Regardless of which spycraft we're talking about here, I feel like being a spy, being in the world of intelligence, you're not long for the career, right? Like it really does take a toll. But I am curious, we were talking about the differences between the two. Just personally, I'd like to get both your perspectives on this. Do you think one approach or the other takes a greater toll? Is it worse, individually, if you're approaching things and you feel like you're kind of on your own and isolated, or from the community aspect that Eastern espionage takes, you're kind of affecting some, normal people, good people, as it's put in the book. So let's have you give your thoughts on that first, Terry.
I can compare this to the job I do. The bulk of the time I'm working alone, essentially, by myself, and then there's a percentage of the times where I'm dealing with Pornsak or with Rachel or my editor, and then then I go to a convention. All of a sudden, I go, it's definitely a community, and so I think I can see the advantage of how the integration of both is ideal, because that's kind of like how my life works. So
that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. Well, you were describing that, it's like I can totally picture those combinations. That's my life. It's that solo person dealing with all these problems and figuring these things out, but then through the community you get all this refreshment back, like, and all this encouragement and feedback and everything, and that definitely. So yeah, I think that combination is ideal.
What about you, Pornsak? You think one's better than the other?
I mean, I can't say sort of which espionage works better than the other, but I definitely feel like, I think everything is easier with a community. And it's funny, I think that as I was writing The Manchurian, as I'm writing these books, I think what the book is about to me becomes clear after I've written it, as I'm talking more about it and all that. And one of the things The Manchurian sort of makes clear, and it's something that I'd love to do with Terry if we get to, if this goes further than the one shot, and it's something that we've always planned, is there is a temptation to think that the opposite of community is the individual. But I think one of the things I realized writing The Manchurian, and something I'm very interested to explore, is that the opposite of community is actually a corporation. A corporation is where the individual goes away and disappears, and a community is where there's many individuals that exist sort of together. And so somewhere between community and corporation is an individual. And it's about, like, where do you fit along that scale? how much of your individuality, contributes to the people around you, and how much of that individuality gets swallowed up by something sort of amorphous. And so I think one of the reasons why this whole thing fascinates me is the idea of, like, I do think there's power in a community. I definitely, I think there's time to sort of be an individual, but I also think too, the way a good community works is that a good community, it doesn't make the individual anonymous. You're still an individual, and then you choose to interact with the community, but you're not divorced from it just because you're not interacting with it. And like Terry says, that's very much comics. It's the thing that I love about working with comics is that, we kind of all worked on our silos, and then when we come together and we work together and we jam together, and then we go back to our individual things, and then we come back together. It is one of the sort of the magical things that I love about comics.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it, but you're 100% right. Being part of a corporation, big company, anybody out there in the audience who works for a big company, Amazon or whatever, yeah, you are sort of faceless. You are sort of a drone in a lot of ways. Not to say your work is not valuable. You're adding to the collective. But the other thing that's great and how it relates to this, like spycraft and espionage these days is way more about corporate espionage than trying to get government secrets, right? With these, worldwide conglomerations of businesses and what have you. Yeah, it's more about getting information on the next thing so you can, increase your profits than it is about, trying to steal nuclear codes, let's say.
Yeah. Because that's where the real power is nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you mentioned Pornsak when you were giving that answer about if this continues. This book is coming out. It's a one shot, and then based on sales, we'll see if it continues. There are some other books in the Horizon experiment that are coming out as well with the same type of format. So, you want to talk a little bit about the Horizon experiment and what other one shots we can expect?
Sure. So the Horizon experiment is 5 one-shot pilots with the idea is if that the response and the sales are good for any one of them or all of them will continue to for more series. And what I basically did is I got kind of like sort of my super friends of color of different backgrounds from coming from comics, but also from prose, from novels and television and film and theater, and all of them who had all wanted to write comics and create their own comics, and had each of them sort of write their own one-shot for a potential new series. And the marching orders were or the challenge, I should say, was the same for all of them, is give me a protagonist of color, set the story in a popular genre, but set the story up in such a way that if you change any aspect of the character's background, your whole story would have to change as well. And so from that, we've got 5 very different books. We have Manchurian, which is about a super spy doing covert missions in America for China. The next book out next month, which is FOCing right now, is The Sacred Damned by Saber Prasada, who's done work he's a screenwriter who's done work for Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm. He was the writer Marvel chose to work with Iman Vellani and the MCU's own Kamala Khan to write the Ms. Marvel comic. He's working with the amazing Michael Walsh, who's I think the best horror cartoonist working right now, to do a book called The Sacred Dam, and that's a book about a Muslim exorcist, or for lack of a better term, a Muslim John Constantine, as we've been calling her. Saber and Michael have been sort of fantastic working together. I'm raving about Michael very recently because I just read the first issue of Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite comics, maybe of the fall, definitely of the month. So to have him sort of team up with Saber, taking a whole new approach to horror and exorcism and possession and all this stuff that we thought we knew really well. So they're doing a fantastic job right now. That book is FOCing at the end of the month on September 30th. So if you're interested in that, please tell your stores now. Then there is, at the month following, there is the horror novelist Tananarive Due. For people who aren't familiar with Tananarive Due, she's kind of like the Octavia Butler of horror. She is on every horror documentary. She's such an authority on the topic, and she's working with this hot newcomer, Kelsey Ramsey, who went from doing anthologies to working on Scott Snyder's line to working on Constantine in the span of like 2 years on this like ridiculously accelerated trajectory. And they're working together on a book called Moondogs, which is about East African werewolves secretly living in Miami. And it's a story about being a minority within a minority. And, and it's so great because Tananarive Due is sort of esteemed in horror and in horror and in as a novelist Stephen King talked about her latest book, The Reformatory, on PBS. Jordan Peele is a fan. And she's doing her first solo, full-length feature here in comics with the Horizon Experiment. So I'm super excited about that. After that, the next month in December, Jay Holtham, who is a playwright, a screenwriter, and a co-executive producer on the Emmy-winning Handmaid's Tale, is working with this wonderful indie cartoonist by the name of Michael Lee Harris, who is this completely unique voice and distinctive style, and they're doing Motherfucking Monsters, which is Evil Dead for blurs, for black nerds. Mm-hmm. And so we've got some horror comedy kind of going in there. The month after that, in January, we have Vida Ayala, who's worked on everything in comics, reuniting with Skylar Patridge, who's a superstar in the making. They worked together on Trial of the Amazons for DC, and now this is their first creator-owned book called Finders Keepers, which is about a reverse Indiana Jones, someone who steals from museums to bring artifacts back to their native cultures. And so all of these books are all pilots for future series. Response and sales will dictate if there's more. And they're really about just taking different approaches to genres that we love to make something new.
Yeah, which is again something that we're talking about here with Manchurian in terms of the difference between Eastern and Western spycraft, but also the fact that it's not this old straight womanizing alcoholic white guy of James Bond that we all know and love. We love him for his foibles or what have you, but somebody that is of Asian descent and seems a little bit more of a conscience than James Bond does. So I'll throw it back over to you one last time, Terry. In terms of approaching that, any difference when you approach that visually, knowing that it's something we know, the concept of James Bond, but it's kind of turned on its head?
No, I think actually, to be honest, I think pushing that, even though it's slightly different, is kind of, I think what I tried to do. I did try to actually still make it feel like I was drawing a James Bond book, even though that's what I mean, I think that was you want to keep that level of consistency, because by keeping that part of it constant, when you change something, it really stands out. It's this isn't usually seen in a James Bond film. I'm not used to seeing anything. So I'm pretty sure I think that was like something I really wanted to emphasize and keep into that in that manner. And I mean, one of the reasons I did want to draw this book is because I saw it as a spy book, even though I knew there were these other parts to it, but there's still stuff in the genre I thought visually I wanted to play with.
Yeah, and a lot of those changes that you're talking about, it's what we were mentioning earlier, maybe the toll that it's taking, a little bit more realism, the toll that this is taking. And then to go back to your earlier point, Terry, it gives you a chance to do those subtle details and that character acting. The fact that this is the things that Calvin Lowe does are affecting him. And we see that toward the end for sure with something that happens. So.
Right.
Well, it's been fantastic chatting, gentlemen. Again, everybody, Manchurian out this week at your comic shop, if you're listening to this the week that it comes out. But like Pornsak said, comics live and die, comic shops live and die, and the comics themselves, if these continue, it'll be because pre-orders. Pre-order. I know I hammer you guys on that all the time, probably get tired of hearing me say it, but it's just so true. Like, how can Pornsak and the rest of, these creators, Terry and everybody, know that you want the book or that it's going to be successful or they should continue if the orders aren't there? So let your comic shop know to pre-order these books for you. Be sure to pick them up, and they're just fantastic. So again, thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining us. I'll throw it back over to you, Pornsak, one last time. Anything else to share with our audience?
I just want to reiterate what you said. The FOC window hasn't closed for The Sacred Dam yet. Our next one-shot, which is about a Muslim exorcist, a Muslim John Constantine. And, in 6 days, The Manchurian comes out. And, from all the buzz that we're hearing, I think there's actually a good chance it'll sell out. So please, everybody, if you're interested in a copy, let your store know now to just put one aside for you, and don't expect to sort of see it on the stands. Because I really, it's been wonderful working with Terry. And so I would love to do more of it. And more than anything, I want people who are interested to be able to check it out. So just tell your store to put one aside for you if you're interested.
Yeah, I mean, if the store has ordered enough to have a shelf copy or two, with this incredible cover that you did, Terry, they're going to get snapped up like that. That is a cover that's going to grab people's eye, right? And they're going to grab, hey, what's this? They're going to grab it.
That's right.
That's right. And one last thing that I want to mention, talk about The Sacred Damned, which when this Muslim John Constantine shows up on the page for the first time, man, she's just such a badass. It looks so good.
She's such a badass.
Yeah, I've had a chance to read that one and Tanner Reeves' book as well. They're both fantastic.
Right.
But one thing I wanted to mention about Sabir. So everybody, he did a graphic novel that's really fantastic. It's a bunch of kind of vignettes or really short stories. It's called Dandelion. I'm sure you've probably read it, Pornsak. You guys, you need to read that. Go and check that out. It's so topical and interesting and engenders conversations with you and your friends. So it's not part of the Horizon experiment, but I had to mention it. Go read that, and that will tell you that, yes, you got to pick up Sacred Damned for sure. Well, gentlemen, best of luck with the series. My thought is I don't see how this doesn't continue because I think it's going to do really, really well. So, again, thank you so much for taking the time, and best of luck with the series.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and to everyone out there in the audience, we want to thank you as well. We appreciate you joining us, whether you're listening to the audio-only feed or join us on YouTube. We appreciate the support as always, and we'll talk to you next time.